Hello everybody and welcome to the UKEndZone.com football daily podcast with me, Oliver Conley, and what we're calling a Request Sunday. It's a solo Sunday podcast, and we're going to do some Twitter questions with one real main focus, that being collegiate football and that being the SEC. Coming up later in the show, the first question we had in though was from UK Fantasy NFL at UK Fantasy NFL, and you can send these questions to at UKEndZone on Twitter, or you can send them to myself at Ollie, i.e. UKEZ, so you can send them Ollie UKEZ. UK Fantasy NFL says, why are the middle of the pack teams sticking with middle of the road quarterbacks rather than giving exciting rookies a shot? And I mean, this question, you look at a team like Jacksonville, you look at a team like Cleveland, and you can say maybe, do you buy into Brian Hoyer? Do you buy into Chad Henne? Why aren't we buying into Johnny Manziel as a program, as an organization? Or why aren't we buying into the Blake Bortles? It's pretty simple. When you invest in these young guys, and you invest in a Blake Bortles, and you invest the third overall pick in a guy, you've got to put him in the best scenario for him to win. There's no point in just throwing him out there, getting the hit clock ticking. All NFL players have a hit clock. Clever quarterbacks that go on for years, like a Manning, like a Brady, are so intelligent in the pocket. They don't suffer so much damage as many hits as other guys, but everybody has a hit clock, and at one point you're going to hit it, and there's no point in starting it early if you're two players who are going to be high collision guys, like a Bortles, like a Manziel, if it's unnecessary and if you don't need it. And also, when you're looking at these guys and they look super exciting in pre-season, you have to remember one thing. One, most of the times they're playing backups. And most people point to that when they're doing, writing columns and stuff the next day about how Bortles played or how Manziel played. Yeah, they were playing with twos themselves. They're also playing against twos, threes, maybe a mixture of ones. But the other thing you have to remember is, one, they're using a really simplified playbook themselves. So their offensive coaching staff are using a simplified playbook for the new rookies. They will have their playbook now will look drastically different in 6-7 weeks time. And secondly, the defenses they're playing against aren't using anywhere near their playbook. Johnny Manziel, if he starts week 1, is faced off against two of the best defensive minds we've seen in the past decade. One, Mike Tomlin, and Dick LeBeau as well. Dick LeBeau is one of the greatest defensive coaches to ever coach in the NFL. And you're going to throw Johnny Manziel out there with, who's on his side, Kyle Shanahan? Is that an even matchup? Kyle Shanahan and Johnny Manziel, the rookie, against Dick LeBeau and all those Steelers guys who've been there for years? I mean, that just isn't a fair matchup. It just, to me, isn't worth chucking out these rookies just for the excitement factor. Just because Johnny sells a ton of jerseys, organizations aren't that dumb, and just because the fans want to see him, I don't think they're going to chuck out a guy like a Johnny Manziel to the Wolves, to a Dick LeBeau, unless he's so overwhelmingly good in practice, and neither of them have been. They've both been pretty damn good. They both had their good days, they've had their bad days, because they're rookies, that's what rookies do. But there's no point in throwing people out there just for the excitement factor if a guy like a Manziel is going to get his head taken off because he's never seen anything like a coverage that Dick LeBeau is going to throw at him. It just really isn't worth the risk. I mean, don't get me wrong, I want to see Johnny start as much as anyone. I'd love to see, I will be glued to the TV first weekend if he is lining up against the Steelers. It's going to be exciting, it's going to be fascinating to watch. His whole career, his career arc will be so fascinating to watch. But if you have to put yourself into the feet of the organization, of the Cleveland Browns organizations, Mike Pettin as the head coach, everyone over there at the Cleveland Browns, is it worth taking that gamble? I don't know if it is. When you're in a division with a team that more than likely won't compete even for a wildcard spot this year with the lack of offensive weapons, as good as the defense looks, is it worth taking that risk? I say, as I said before, wait till week 4. They have a bye week, I believe, week 4 or 5. They face 3 defenses that could be top 5 defenses in the coming season this year for the first 3 weeks. It just isn't worth the risk to me. It isn't worth the risk. Okay, we're going to move on now to the main topic of today, which comes in from Adam Nichols. He's at Adam Megabyte on Twitter. He really is a cool NFL fan from the UK to interact with. So if you're looking for some more people to interact with, I really do recommend going to Adam Megabyte on Twitter and interacting with Adam. He's a great listener, and thanks Adam for sending the question. He says, give us an SEC breakdown, contenders, pretenders, names to look for, etc. Adam wants a full preview of the SEC, and, let's do it. Let's head into, college football season is just around the corner. We start off with an FBS team against Georgia State, and I will still be glued to it. I'll be glued to all collegiate football this year, and I hope people who haven't tuned into too much college football before have maybe been enticed into it if it's one of their first few years in the NFL by watching the NFL draft, seeing a guy like a Johnny Manziel, who's a name that transcends the sport. The year before that, we had a Manti Te'o. He transcended the sport. It's just an unbelievable sport to get into, and I would recommend for everyone to get into collegiate football. It is, to me, superior to the National Football League, and I love the NFL, but I love college football even more. Let's kick off then. I'm going to do this by looking at the main categories within the SEC. We're going to go with offensive player, coach, defensive player. Then I'm going to give you a prediction from each division within the conference of the Southeastern Conference, and we'll roll from there. Starting with Offensive Player of the Year, then I've got 3 standout names that I think people will either already know about, and you'll probably know about all 3 of them, and then we'll chuck another guy on the end as well. And number 1 is Nick Marshall, the quarterback out of Auburn. This guy has really grown his game in the offseason. He rushed for 1,000 yards last year, and it simply isn't sustainable for him or Gus Malzahn to run a sort of offense again with the sort of spread option, the way they do it, for him to keep the ball at times when he really shouldn't have been and was misreading and keeping the ball. I think he's improved on that. He's also improved his passing. He looks really good. He looked really good in the A game that Auburn hosts, their annual spring game, throwing the football, albeit going against 2s at Auburn, but he still looked really good throwing the football all over the shop. So if he improves as a passer, there's no reason why this guy with all-purpose Cam Newton, Johnny Manziel style yards won't be the Offensive Player of the Year. But he's coming up against incredible stiff competition, particularly from the running back department. We have so many good running backs in the SEC this year, and you've got to start with Todd Gurley, one of the fan favorites of everyone from the Southeastern Conference. We fear him as fans that aren't supporting Georgia. The Georgia fan and Georgia nation just love this guy, Todd Gurley. Looking at what they're going to do this year, they have a new quarterback, so they're having a quarterback transition. They've got Mike Bobo there. He's going to look to just feed Todd Gurley so often in the game. And when you've got a quarterback transition and a running back as good, as strong, as powerful, who can get in and out of the tackles just like Todd Gurley can, you're probably looking at a 1,400 to 1,500 yard season. This could be just a mind-blowing number style season from Todd Gurley. In Georgia, the Bulldogs look pretty decent this year. The only question I have is that quarterback transition, but Gurley's going to get the ball so often, early and often. You're looking at a crazy high number of yardage, and when you're looking at that, that's when you look at an Offensive Player of the Year. And the other guy is, of course, you got to go to the University of Alabama, and Josh Hunt is going to love this one, because TJ Yeldon didn't really live up to the hype that came into last year. Josh actually picked him to be the Heisman Trophy winner, which was just stupid of you, Josh, as we look at it in reflection. But TJ could have an unbelievable year this year. We don't know as of yet who is going to be starting right now for the Crimson Tide under center. We have no idea. It's probably going to be Jacob Coker, the transfer out of FSU, but it may not be. So we don't even know who that's going to be, which means we're going to have trouble with the passing game early in the season, which means Yeldon's going to get fed and fed again. He's coming off that line of Ingram, Richardson, all these different running backs. TJ Yeldon will be used in the exact same way. They have another good offensive line, a different offensive line for Alabama this year. Usually with Alabama, if you look at the way they structure their offensive line and why they send so many guys to the NFL, they'll pick up a top 5 recruit in the nation, a 5-star guy, and he will play from freshman or sophomore year. They don't really have a rotation of guys who are juniors who then become seniors on their offensive line, or guys who are sophomores who then become juniors on their offensive line. These guys are usually freshmen or sophomores, and that's when they start, and then they become redshirt sophomores, or they become straight juniors, and then they head to the NFL. This is the first time we've had a succession of guys at Alabama, so it'll be interesting to see how those guys do, not being 4-star recruits. That'll be interesting to see how Alabama cope, but it's still going to be a good offensive line. Always coached up well then, which gives TJ Yeldon an unbelievable shot when you throw that in, with the fact that the defense is young and athletic. They'll get him the ball back often enough, and they haven't named a quarterback. You throw all that together, he's going to get fed so often. Yeldon should have a good year, but he should have had a good year last year as well. So we may see monster numbers from Yeldon, we may not. He's probably, Marshall and Gurley, the clear 1-2. Yeldon in that next camp below. And the other guy is Bo Wallace, the quarterback out of Ole Miss. He's the guy who is more of a wild card. Bo just cannot turn the ball over anymore. If he doesn't turn the ball over, Ole Miss are going to win a ton more games. They're going to win a ton of games. and he's going to have himself a chance at the Heisman Trophy. That's how much turnovers impacted him last year. He's a great talent. He's surrounded by unbelievable talent. They have recruited so well. And just today, Ole Miss, they stole 2 guys from Alabama just today. So they're just recruiting out of their head right now. And we know they had that unbelievable recruiting class 2 years ago, last year as well, Bo Wallace being one of those guys. So they are loaded with talent and they are ready to go, and Bo just cannot make knucklehead decisions. He just got to play within himself, get into the game using that game manager tag of getting yourself 14 points. Just get the 14 points on the board without turning the ball over. Then you can do some more expansive stuff. You can try and force the ball down the field, but give yourself that bedrock of a 14-point advantage before you try and do too many things. And that'll take us to the defensive side of the ball. And we know the SEC being such a dominant defensive conference compared to like your Pac-12s, your Big Tens. See, conferences now that are just trying to light up the scoreboard all the time with Oregon, with UCLA, even Stanford now. Their defense, as potent as it can be within the Pac-12, can often be torched outside the Pac-12. So this is where the SEC will often climb above its opponents. And let's look at some of the top names within the SEC this year. Number 1 for me is Ramit Wilson, linebacker out of Georgia. They brought in Jeremy Pruitt from FSU, just a great defensive mind. The lad had 133 tackles last year. He's an all-SEC guy. He's just relentless. He'll just attack the ball. He's got the great instincts that you need playing from the linebacker spot. Wilson's going to have a dominant year. He'll go on to be an All-American. He'll probably go on to the NFL as well. That brings us to a couple of Florida guys. You know that I love the school of Florida, and we've got to start with Dante Fowler Jr. The SEC was always won in the trenches, on both sides of the ball, within the trenches. That's why Alabama have been so good of late. They haven't tried to go after 5-star recruits galore at the wide receiver spot. Yes, they end up with great players like Amari Cooper. Don't get me wrong. They end up with some really good running backs. But the bulk of their side, and when you look at the NFL draft, this bears out, is ball from trying to get guys on the defensive side of the ball in the front 7 and trying to get guys on the offensive side of the ball within the trenches. And that's where you've got to try and win this league. And that's what Dante Fowler is really going to provide for Florida. Just genuine raw power from the bottom of his legs, the middle of his hips. He just explodes the football. He's an unbelievable talent. He's going to go probably in the first round of the NFL draft. He's a true disruptor on the defensive line. He's going to miss his buddy inside, Dominique Easley, but he's just going to be a sensational defensive end this year. And when do we ever really, as much as I'm in line, as much as I get frustrated by Will Muschamp, when do we ever really see a bad Will Muschamp defense? He always looks for that anchor. It's been Easley in the past. It's been multiple players. This year, it's more than likely going to be Dante Fowler. Everyone will take their keys off Fowler in terms of how they scheme things up, and he's going to have just a sensational year. Which brings me to the second Florida player who maybe, I'm going to say probably is the best defensive player in the entire SEC based on raw talent. You look at Vernon Hargreaves III. This guy had a very good freshman year before he got injured for just stupid and continuous stupid things off the field, fighting with teammates, just doing stupid, boneheaded things that caused him injuries and caused him a suspension as well. But in terms of talent, this guy is equally as talented, if not more talented, than Ifo Ekpre-Olomu out of Oregon, the cornerback. He is easily as good a cornerback as Luis Purifoy and Marcus Robertson were last year, and people who've listened to me over the last 12 months will know just how highly I rate and love particularly Marcus Robertson and how good Luis Purifoy was as a cornerback in the SEC as well. Vernon Hargreaves III has the chance to be a top 5 NFL draft bait next year. If he sorts his act out and if he puts on the display he can do this year. And that'll bring me to another member of the Alabama Crimson Tide and another guy in the secondary, and Landon Collins. You barely ever see a safety win the Defensive Player of the Year. When you look at Landon Collins in Alabama this year, their front 7 is so much better than their defensive backs. I understand Nick Saban is the best coach in all of college football at coaching defensive backs, But the talent right now, the level is just not where it has been and where it needs to be. When you constantly lose so many players to the NFL, it takes its toll. It'll go cyclical. Eventually you'll hit just sophomores who just aren't at that level of what you need them to be at. And that's where Alabama's at right now. And the cornerbacks, they may end up being really good, but right now all the pressure will be on Collins, and he's going to have to be the guy who's making ball hawking plays. He's going to be the guy whose tackle numbers are inflated by missed plays from the rest of the cornerbacks. Collins, the safety, is going to have a sensational year. He's the guy who's going to be allowed to drop down the box and get on blitzes. None of the other defensive backs, because Saban just frankly won't trust them, and he's a coach all about trust. So believe in Landon Collins this year. If you can get some decent odds on SEC defensive players, I would take a real good shot at Landon Collins. His numbers will be inflated by the talent around him, and he's just such a pure, dominant football player as well. And he's going to have just a sensational year. Let's talk newcomers then. Let's talk newcomers to the SEC, and we cannot discuss the 2014-15 SEC without heading out to Louisiana State and to LSU University and talking about Leonard Fournette. I mean, this boy is unbelievable. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. If you've not heard of Leonard Fournette, type into YouTube right now. It's Fournette, Fournette, and just check out this guy's highlight tape. He was the number 1 overall recruit in the nation, 5-star running back. And he is so crazily in the image of a guy like a Maurice Clarett, of an Adrian Peterson, of a Marcus Lattimore. This is how good he looks, and often you have to play down the hype of a 5-star freshman because they simply won't have enough of an impact on the team, or they'll even be redshirted at the quarterback position. But in the running back position, again, you look at those 3 guys, Lattimore, Peterson, Clarett, you can have a major impact from the running back position just through pure, sheer talent. And Fournette would have been drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. That's how good he is. If he was allowed to come out of high school, as he should be able to, he'd have gone the first round of the NFL draft in a running back killer of near in the NFL. This is how talented this young fella is. And LSU are going to put everything on his plate to begin with. They're going to mix up the running backs, of course, but it's going to be such a run-dominant team. He's going to see tons of touches, and he's easily going to beat out anything else that LSU has there. And he's going to go on and be the major running back in that offense. And Les Miles, it shows you how excited they are. Les Miles is comparing him to guys like Michael Jordan, Adrian Peterson himself. He is buying into the hype as a head coach, which means the hype is real, which means it's going to be great. They are not trying to temper expectations. They themselves are buying into the Fournette hype. The boy is just so talented. It's going to be so fun to watch. That is the guy to get behind. I saw odds today on Bavoda. He has 6 to 1 for him to win the Heisman. Are you kidding me? We haven't had a running back win the Heisman in such a long time. The committee is desperate. They are desperate to give it to someone who's not a running quarterback. They're desperate to do it. They're not going to give it to Jameis Winston again. They never go back to back. They probably won't want to give it to Marcus Mariota at a Lifetime Achievement Award, as we discussed with Josh on the pod the other day. So Fournette's a great shout. 6 to 1. Put a tenner on it. Go and put a tenner on it today, and you could end up winning 600 odd quid just from putting on a silly bet about the Heisman Trophy. I implore you to do it. Time to talk overrated and underrated. The most overrated team in the SEC this year, easily Texas A&M. People are buying into Kevin Sumlin. Don't buy into it one bit. The guy should have took the money and run to the NFL as soon as he had the chance, or run to the University of Texas as soon as he had a chance, because he's won 20 games the past 2 years, and I am not putting all of the share on Johnny Manziel's shoulders, but holy heck, you watch some of those games. He bailed out that team time and time again. There is zero defense at the University of Texas A&M. There's no Johnny football this year. It could be similar to Florida last year. That's how much they could drop off the table. It could just be horrendous to watch. And Sumlin won't be fearing for his job. Obviously, he's going to have the chance to go out there and recruit, and he'll recruit off the Johnny football name. But man, when you have 2 years, like Sumlin just had, turning that program around and find this boy from nowhere and coaching him up, I'd have took the money and run. I'd have jilted the University of Texas A&M, and I would have run all the way down the road to the University of Texas at Austin. I would have run the Cleveland Browns and said, you fancy drafting that Johnny football in the first round at some point? Don't go and get that defensive coordinator from Buffalo. Why don't you bring me in as well? Sumlin missed a trick. I'm telling you, missed a trick. And I think they could be 5th or worst even in the West. The West is so difficult. They're really going to struggle this year. And the most underrated team, we spoke about them before, is Ole Miss. Bo Wallace may be this year's Johnny football. I'm telling you, if he doesn't turn the ball over, and the way Hugh Freeze has recruited in the last couple of years, and with these recruiting classes now maturing, they may finish as high as third in the West. It's not impossible. It's not impossible. Really, really underrated side. And that's going to take us now to the predictions of each division in the SEC. I'm sorry for just talking all on my own, and I wanted to try and get someone on to do this review, but with such short notice, and me doing the podcast so late and wanting to get the podcast out every single day, we didn't have time to fully line up someone to come on and talk about the SEC with me. So what we're going to do next week, we're going to try and get some other guys on for some other collegiate divisional previews. We've got mains coming on for some NFL betting. So we've got a ton of stuff coming up next week, and that is when I will finish this SEC preview by bringing someone else in to bounce off them in terms of the teams, and I will give my predictions for where every team will place, both in the East and in the West, and we'll hopefully run through the rest of college football just before we get to the season. So I will give my predictions then for who will win the divisions, who's going to win the conference, everything like that will come next week. But that is a quick preview of the SEC and how it's going to shape out this year, and some of the stars that if you're not big into college football, you can start to look out for, start to get to know the names of, and if you're just a fan of the NFL, start to get excited for that they may well be drafted by your team. So that'll do us for today. For the Football Daily Podcast, I've been Oliver Conley, and we'll speak to you tomorrow.